Hello Booktube, my name is Fraser. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. Today I'm doing a weekly reads. Usually I do this on a Sunday, so it's a full week. Today I'm doing it on a Saturday. Still gonna post it on a Monday. But I have a particular book that I wanted to discuss beforehand and after, and it seems relatively unlikely that I'll finish it today anyway. I might not finish a book today at all, which is unlikely, but true. I generally finish something every day, either an audiobook or a physical book, so it's wild times. I have also another DNF of the year, which is working out to be what? One DNF a month? That's not too bad. This is another very surprising one though. Before it was The Promise and Checkout 18 and something else. All books that I thought I was going to like, but didn't. And this is another kind of big one. First off, I have If I Was Your Girl by Meredith Russo. I consumed this because I was doing the Stand With Trans Kids tag. I did not include this, however, because the authors got some allegations against her that seemed pretty confirmed for domestic abuse against her partner, who is non-binary but is erased by Meredith Russo herself when verbally assaulting her. So there's some wild stuff there. However, I'm still going to review it, and I still think it's worthy of review. For instance, I've posted reviews on J.K. Rowling, and she's done far more harm than Meredith has, and yet I still feel okay reviewing them because I have the book, I consumed it, and I gave my thoughts on it, and I'll do it for this book as well. And if you want to consume this book for free, there's ways of doing it, and I also think it's kind of an important book to consume. It's by a trans woman. There's a trans woman on the cover. A trans woman narrates it impeccably. It is so good. And it is YA romance that just allows a trans girl to have powerful story that is, yes, somewhat geared towards a cis audience, kind of like accepting it more so than it being completely maybe for real or something. There's notes at the back where the author addresses this, but I didn't have a problem with it. I thought it was really moving. There was tension where it needed to be. It was respectful. It still went into trans issues. It quietly educated the reader without having like a full responsibility of doing so. The character was able to just be in their existence and be a girl who's falling for a guy, and there are secrets kept between them, so it's not like a gotcha moment or something like that, but they both fear revealing fundamental intrinsic things about each other to one another, even as they're falling in love. It's sickly sweet. It's in the South. The narrator has like a Southern Belle accent to it. It's just really phenomenal stuff. I even like the ending. There is a content warning for sexual assault, but it is handled quite well, I think. And like I said, some of the choices in kind of gearing this towards like the resolution that it has without spoiling things is described in the back and sort of not justified but explained to the reader, and it's addressed to both trans people separately to cis people, which I thought was interesting. So I think it's a book that like trans kids and everybody needs to be consuming. I think it should still be stocked in libraries, and it's an important book, and maybe once more of these types of things come out and it becomes normalized and accepted and trans people start making some money, then something else can replace it in the canon place, I guess, that it has for an important book. But for now it is what it is, and I thought it was quite good. I gave it 4 stars. So if you have any thoughts on that, I'd feel free to put it in the comments. I still am noodling on it, but I think it feels like that's how I feel in the moment anyway. Then I consumed The Wind in the Willows, both on audio and physical. And this book I didn't rate just because I have it and I wanted to get it out of the way for consumption because it's anthropomorphizing animals, stories, and it is one of those ones where it's like this sort of nature of each animal comes out in their personality. And I just don't agree with stories that do that. I feel better about like Redwall and Mouseguard because they're like not saying that everything in that specific species behaves in a specific way, and it's more about throwing all of the personalities, quirks, and characteristics of the human race onto a different species, enabling people to feel and maybe like participate in a different empathy exercise than otherwise. I still don't feel great about that, but I feel better about it than this. And plus it's a kid's story, right? So just rating it feels strange as an adult. I don't think I accepted the conceit for what it was. Obviously just explained it. And otherwise I thought it was fine. Like I probably would have given it 3 stars, but then the conceit is something that I think is actually like a colonial mindset replicated into how we perceive nature, basically. And so I don't agree with it, and because of that I would have downgraded it to like a 2 or a 1, depending, just because some aspects of the story are not that great anyway. But again, it's like a kid's book. Who wants to shit on a kid's book? You know, the stakes are low. Then I consumed Manhunt by Gretchen Felker-Martin. Fantastic book. I saw Kevin's video on that, so I'll point you to that as well. But I thought it was phenomenal. I don't read much horror, and if I do, it tends to be queer horror, just because the themes around marginalization, the lack of agency, loss of agency, and how it returns to the characters, if it does, tends to be more interesting, and it's just different. It's just a different thing to consume than most horror, and so I like it. And this is no different. I give this 5 stars. So this book just came out, what, 2 months ago? Something like that. It's about 2 partners, 2 trans women, I believe, who are resigned basically to hunting men who become creatures after the T virus infects the entire world with something that like essentially drives anyone with a certain amount of testosterone in their system completely mad. They become like rapists, and they don't think for themselves. It's kind of like a zombie-ish trope, but not really. More like returning to a primordial self, lizard brain thing where they're constantly in like fight or flight mode or something like that, maybe. And the reason why these women have to hunt them is because they have glands, and in their testes they have estrogen, so to consume it, which enables them to stave off the virus themselves and obviously stay as their individual selves. And so the genuinely genius thing about this, though, is that, for one, testosterone levels is generally in the cultural intellect about how we talk about trans lives in sports, right? The amount of testosterone in anyone's bloodstream dictates who or what gender they can perform under in, like, say, the Olympics. And women have been precluded from doing this because they generated too much testosterone in their system for multiple different medical conditions. And cis women have no problem with this, right? There's no outcry about a cis woman who gets disqualified because there's too much testosterone in their system, because then they would have to admit that it's kind of the best system that they have for testing for this thing, but it is not necessarily something that needs to be regulated that much, right? Like, they could simply come up with different standards, I think, that are more inclusive and more interesting, even, to keep things competitive, but they choose not to because they need, anyway, they choose not to. And so the interesting thing in this world about that, though, is that similarly the trickle-down effect of the T virus infecting people is that it infects completely everybody. And whereas this trans convoy group of people traveling essentially who hook up for various reasons, meet a colony, I guess, like a town of cis women. They should be working together to combat the evident and very present danger of these men who have gone rabid and will rape and kill them at any moment, basically. So there's a constant tension and fear in the atmosphere, but these TERFs in the cis women area have radicalized people with the exact same rhetoric that we see today, isolating them and making the chances of survival less thing for both people, both groups of women, right? And so it also, as these two factions interact, trans women become sort of fetishistic objects by certain cis women. The rhetoric of the TERFs completely replicates itself onto this world in a very organic way from just one simple question, which is, or one simple world building idea or notion, which is if you have X amount of testosterone, you're lost to the virus. And so it's just like a very simple yet absolutely genius way to model these things into a horror scenario. And more than that, all the characters are not like no alt-right person or whatever could consume this book and think that these characters are not well-rounded, very fair. They all have like quirks. There's infighting, which replicate queer community infighting as well. It's very smart on that front. It's a very queer book, of course, in every way possible, basically. There's visceral, amazing action scenes in this book, like nothing I have ever consumed before. Like just some of the best action scenes, period, with tension and just like really propulsive prose that you just can't look away from. And that is equally given to the sexual scenes that are written, and it just makes it so that the tension is ratcheted up all of the time, right? Because it's always fight or flight mode for these trans women as well, but some of the cis women as well. And so the choice to make it kind of like erotic to the same point and quality of the writing of the action, giving equal credence to those, makes it really like humanistic and moving and compelling, basically. It's very bold because critics will be like, you know, she's fetishizing the violence as well, and all this bad things happen to women, where basically every character is a woman, right? So bad things have to happen to women in this scenario. And the kick of it is that many of these bad things would be avoided if they could achieve some kind of reconciliation, which is only tramped out by TERF rhetoric, which is at its heart a very boring, one-dimensional, sided viewpoint, which ironically the author has to kind of bolster or buttress for those characters, because otherwise they would just be hate machines that regurgitate the exact same rhetoric all of the time. So most of these people are more nuanced than they are in reality. Like they're so obsessed in reality with transness and trans women that they become singularly obsessed in their lives. It subsumes everything about them, ironically. So I think it was just completely genius. It's definitely hard to consume sometimes, and I consume this on audio specifically because I wanted to be kind of orbiting peripherally. I didn't want to be generating sexual assault and that kind of violence self-generated from reading it on the page, and that was a good move for me. I'm not sure if I could handle it, because that's part of the horror that I can't generally handle, But when someone's reading the book to you and you're generating it that way, it feels safer for horror for me. But I'm kind of a baby with horror. I don't read very much of it for a reason. I have a very suggestible brain, and when I go to bed, it comes. So yeah, just a phenomenal book. Thanks a lot, Kebby, for putting it on my radar. Next is You're the Monkey by Patti Smith. I gave this 3 stars. I thought it accomplished exactly what it set out to do. I hope the sun comes back at some point as well. Jeez. But I was kind of hoping for more of this because people give a lot of props to Smith for doing these particular kinds of, memoir, autofiction type deals. I think she can write though. Like, the prose are great. The subjects that she chooses are pretty interesting generally. It definitely justifies, its existence more so than some other memoirs out there. She has interesting ways of orbiting different subjects other than herself, and then the way that she returns to herself is very erudite, I think. But overall, it's short, sweet, and I'm not sure it communicated too much to me. I'm not sure I got anything larger out of it than just an interesting bit of, what is this, 2016, I believe, when the election was going on. She mentions that a few times. There's some cool Polaroids in it that are black and white that are cool kind of artifacts next to it. The actual book is well made and really nice to hold and stuff, but it was fine. I'm glad I got it kind of from the book outlet for $5 or whatever. But I've also heard that her earlier ones are kind of where it's at, and this is just more of something for those fans to latch onto after consuming that. So I guess I did it in the wrong order. Next is a reread for me, a visit from the Goon Squad, Egan. I'm doing this because, or I did this already, because I'm going to be consuming the Candy House with Sina from Beating Around the Books and Mark Nash. So I wanted to kind of brush up on it because I have a bad conflation problem between this and A Song for a New Day, because I read that later on and they're both about music. And it was just wonderful. I bumped it up from 4 stars to 5 stars because I originally consumed it on audio, which is the wrong way to go, I think, for this. I mean, the audio was very good, but there's a section in this near the end with an autistic kid who's trying to express how he loves his parents, the different project that he has going on, measuring the silence in certain songs and what he's trying to convey with that to the parents. And he uses graphs and a whole bunch of different informational communication tools. Basically, it's almost like a PowerPoint presentation kind of that will destroy you. It made me cry anyway. And it's just brilliant. It's a genius work, especially that chapter, and you can't get that effect on audio whatsoever, of course. So I completely missed that the first time around, and it was just really nice coming to every story because it was like finding it again. It was very refreshing, and as it was happening I remembered it and found both why I enjoyed it previously and what I enjoyed about it even more so this second time around, and how it kind of fits in structurally better, just because when I'm consuming audio, structure is hard to analyze. So absolutely fantastic, 5 stars. Everything about it I love. Now the DNF, which is The Savage Detectives, which is I didn't see coming. This book was just not for me, I think, because I made it 200 pages in and it's all just guys talking about either poetry or sex. Poetry or sex or homophobia all of the time. It's definitely a lot of sexual peacocking. There's a lot of brain game testing. There's a lot of like hierarchical BS between the men, and I thought it would get better after I completed the first part, which is substantive, but I hated being in that guy's head, basically. I thought it was very banal. The problem with people with prejudices, like I was saying with Manhunt, is that they're incredibly one-dimensional characters, right? They regurgitate the exact same things all of the time. And so it needs to be about that, or it needs to be so well written in prose and in dialogue that it is captivating and you can't help but be propulsed with it, like Lolita, say. This had none of that. And it also had an adolescent teenager, which is like even more least favorite for me than reading like a children's story, basically, because at least children aren't obsessed with getting laid and the various ways of getting laid and how he treats women and how they treat him and all this kind of stuff. It was just boring. And in the second section, it became more clear what the structure was about. This is obviously going to be a book about where every person characterizes a character that is essentially the author from a different vantage point, and so we kind of get glimpses of him until we construct our own model of him in our head, which is a device that would be interesting if I had first consumed it here, but it's something I've consumed at least 8 to 10 times by now. 3 times this year, right? So, yeah, maybe I'll return to it at some point when I have more patience for, you know, a young idiot child boy, fuck boy, but at the moment, I can't seem to jibe with the prose, nor do I really care to. I was interested in this too because there's a lot of queer readings that are for or against the author being homophobic, saying like, is he making a point about homophobia, or is he simply homophobic? And of course I can't speak to that at only 200 pages in, but nor will I grind through it to attempt that. Steppenwolf, a little tiny one, little picador classic. I hear about this quite often, and if you saw my library haul, I just picked up another book of his. This is definitely the most famous one, though, I think. And funnily enough, it says on the back, Hesse, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, is a writer of suggestion, of nuance, of spiritual intimation, the Christian Science Monitor. So I have a question for Steve Donahue. Is that a blurb that he provided or was taken from or whatever? I think it would be, right? This version is probably fairly new, and Donahue has written for them for quite some time, so that's kind of fun. I kind of jokingly have assigned this the DMM book as opposed to like a DMW or DWM book, damaged, depressed woman moving through the world. This is a damaged, depressed man moving through the world. It's definitely like analogous to that. It's about a guy who, I wonder also if this is like the progenitor of you have 2 wolves inside you, but I don't know. A Christian religious guy coined that phrase, but maybe he read this, right? It seems Christians are into it. But this is about a guy who finds that he has an inner conflict, a duality between him where he wants to be quite free, a wolf, and he also, on the other hand, really gets some substantive things about being ordered, non-chaotic, etc. So there is like a lot of subjectivity applied to this book. I'd go so far that every reader would probably take something else away from this book because it is, I don't want to say unnuanced, but events and musings vacillate so often that you can't really tell what the character has latched onto, and the culmination of all of that thought in him kind of becomes a place of like more nuance at the end, which is why I gave this 4 stars rather than 3. But it is definitely an idea book. As he moves throughout the world and encounters things, it becomes sort of like surrealistic. It's very atmospheric. The prose will be either for you or not. It feels like another sort of like a Passage North book. completely interior, not much plot whatsoever, not even really character driven. It's not a book that's completely concerned with giving you a definitive answer as to whether or not he has changed, quote, or not. But the granular experience of it has gone into so much detail that, again, it feels like something that is tapped into a human experience, which is something that I always look for in good writing. And I think this has that. It does definitely become uneven at points. It becomes strange at some points, but I'm on board with that. And I generally like a sad boy who's musing about the world anyway. So it definitely is going to be a polarizing book for some people, despite being a classic, I think. But yeah, I got quite a bit out of it in the end. I was surprised at how much I got out of it. And I did quite like the prose work 75% of the time, we'll say. It was mostly I got this because I wanted to see what it was like to read a little itty-bitty book like this. It was kind of interesting because layout really affects my reading, and I think about layout a lot as a designer who has to lay out his games sometimes himself. And so it's very strange to see the widows and the orphans and stuff like that in that, which is a text that hangs on from other paragraphs or words that claw out of one paragraph ending and go on to the next and then have like a period. In layout, you want to try to avoid that, of course, and compartmentalize every paragraph as much as possible. But yeah, so it was an interesting experiment all around. It is definitely like distinctly masculine in its musings, which isn't bad, but it is very much maybe concerned with like a societal hierarchical type situation, and accruing status and relationships to social currencies as well as actual currency, and what that sort of gets you and not. And there's so much duality there that I think if there had been more of a definitive line drawn in the sand by the author who said like, this is why I think, but you can kind of think about anything, or just really anything concrete or solidified, it could have been a 5-star read, but pulls up a little short because of that. So that's Steppenwolf. And then the books that I'm currently reading, Vagabonds, which I think is going to be a 4-star read so far. It's very like quiet sci-fi. It's not going into human experience as much as I typically want from sci-fi, but it's oddly meditative and really interesting at strange bits. So, for instance, the two, I think it's a brother and sister, are chatting about flight, and she is like missing flying in a craft around Mars, I think it is, and she's on Earth at the time, or it's vice versa. And she notices how like the different gravity obviously changes how flight is, and her whole body has been sort of like gotten used to, and her cognitive associations with the task and what she gets out of flight are completely changed, and so she feels sort of robbed of the experience. And it goes into like some granular details about physics and different formulas and stuff like that, and it kind of confirms and reiterates the relationship that those two characters have at the same time while discussing like this almost like trivial detail. And it was just fantastic. There's a lot of small things like that where essentially in this world there are Mars colonists and there are Earth, and just like every other sci-fi book, there was a war between them, and now they're sort of sending envoys to probe each other to see if peace is possible, basically. And she, as well as another character who's a videographer, like an editor, director, a person who makes movies in the future type person, exchange each other to different colonies, and they learn about it in a fish out of water type of way. It's, yeah, like there's it's not super plotty. It's all character driven. It is more about obviously the author being like super interested in these questions that I never would have thought to ask about these things, which I really like. It's kind of chunky. It's around 600 or 600 pages exactly about. And yeah, I'm really enjoying it so far. I'm about halfway in, so it's starting to sort of like ramp up, but I kind of hope that it stays quiet. I like it. And then next, this book I was a little bit worried about, Atomik, Aztex. And this book kind of has like a cult following, right? It's a history reimagining where the Spaniards, the conquistadors, went down to the Aztecs and conquered them, except in this world they didn't. They got trounced, and then the Aztecs went and conquered the world. Fast forward to 1942, there's a battle of Stalingrad, and the Aztecs are like, yeah, hunting Nazi Russians, I think, is what I'm making of it. I say I think because it is very much like a frenetic fever dream. And this is one where I didn't like the prose to begin with. I went through about 24% of the book, I think Goodreads said, 42 pages in the first night, and I slept on it. And I was like, I don't know about these prose. I don't know if it fits structurally with what it's trying to say. I don't know why he keeps inserting these K's everywhere. I don't get it, basically, right? I slept on it, and then I started reading it last night, and it completely changed for me. I just got it. It also, at the same time of this main character, the Aztec person who is assaulting Stalingrad, he has like a cognitive dissonance. He keeps at least ostensibly shifting into different realities or remembering a character from a different reality. And in that world that is sort of like our own, this man works at a slaughterhouse, and he is so far right now mobilizing people to unionize. And so there's some very strange, very interesting parallels that happen with their lives that start saying structural things about the world in both of the worlds. Things to do with society, things to do with oppression, things to do with labor, how we treat our bodies. There's, in the Aztec world, slavery, of course. There's sacrificial rites that kind of empower something like magic, basically, or fate to be on their side. They sacrifice thousands of people all of the time in this culture. He makes certain not to kill some enemies in order to literally enslave them or to sacrifice them later, ritualistically. And then we get the parallel of the other character who's kind of like, he's an older guy, he's got a son, he's very like cranky, he's very like, I don't know, he's bombastic, he's kind of like funny, and everybody seems to be charmed by him and like him, except for the bosses who feel threatened by him, of course. And in the meat packing and the slaughtering and the granular thoughts about each job being taken place by the Aztec person and the person in the slaughterhouse, there's some amazing parallels, like I was saying. So I'm really liking this. The prose work is good. There's a K put in all of the time, just like kind of in the title, where it is intuitive. You can pick up exactly what the word is saying, but there's a dissonance created, and I kind of like that now. And the paragraphs, more or less, this is one thing I'm not super sure about, more or less the paragraphs are structured in such a way that every time there's a break, it will shift to the other character. Not always true, but most of the time it's true. And so the fact that both of them are not misspelling, but conflating each other's words and like vernacular and stuff like that, there's a lot of like street lingo and stuff like that spiced into it. It makes it, yeah, very relatable, yet always reminds you that it's other. It's a different world, or two worlds mashed together, something like that. So yeah, it's very interesting. I am more on board with the structure. I'm not sure if it's quite a 5-star read yet, but it's definitely a 4-star read so far. And I'm about halfway in. And that's it. that's the weekly reads. If you've read anything, if you have any thoughts, if you want to respond to any of my thoughts, feel free to do so in the comments. I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts, opinions, feelings. Definitely add me on Goodreads or Storygraph if you would like. I like having more friends, and especially people that do reviews and ratings and stuff like that on those sites, so that I can kind of see what things are like after I consume them. I generally don't read those things before I consume a book, but afterwards I find them very helpful. I like seeing what people are reading, what's trending, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there should be a link below in order for you to do that. Otherwise, I will see you next video, which will probably be a Tag Tuesday video. Bye.